Welcome to the Ngoma Zethu podcast, episode 2. In this episode, we'll be talking about a rational story. What is a rational story? A rational story is a story that makes sense. A rational story is a story that does not need an approval or discussion or permission to be put out there because it's a rational story. The question becomes whether it hurts you or it offends you, but it doesn't change the fact that it's a rational story. So in this episode, we're going to try to cover about the African people, their story, the rational story about the African history, how things have gone in their history, and that story is always prevented from going out there because it's too rational. When I say too rational, I mean that the story is being reported as things happened. So meaning that if this is a story that talks about the brutalization of African people, that means somebody took part or somebody perpetrated that brutality. And it's logical that whoever has done wrong may not want the story to come out. All right. And so in the African context, if you look at the Africans at home, the Africans in Latin America, the Africans in the Caribbean, and then you come up north, the Africans in America, there's a common story of being invaded and colonized and also being enslaved. And that story is never told, or those Africans that try to tell the story, they're always stopped from telling the story, or they're blacklisted because the story is too rational. It makes too much sense. So what is this story? What is this story? This story has everything to do with somebody who basically wants something. And in his value system, he comes in and get it by any means necessary. All right? But the thing is that he sees himself doing this in the name of good. So he makes up a story. He makes up a story why he's doing it. Why he's doing it. It could be a story like, oh, I'm doing this because you're not civilized, because you're savage. Yeah, I'm doing this because you don't know anything about God. Or I'm doing this because you're sitting on very precious resources and you're not using them. I'm going to come there, and if I have to move you, kill you, I'm going to do that because you're not using them. Okay? Now, I'm going to start with the first one, with the first story. That when somebody comes up with a story that the reason why they are brutalizing you, they are attacking you, like these savage attacks against you, whether it's like taking your land or pressing you or whatever they're doing, there's always the dehumanization of that person, that the victim. But the story is always that because he's superior, that his interests are more paramount, are more important. So he has the liberty to do whatever he wants to do. But the irrational story about it is that wherever somebody comes in to conquer the indigenous people, when they're called inferior, subhuman, then there's also an issue where as soon as that person, the oppressor, comes into the place, within a few years, the color of the skin of the indigenous people start to change. So that means the superior being is having sex with an inferior being. Now, a rational story would be, if I considered myself superior, why would I want to have sex with a subhuman? So that means the story that he's telling is not a rational story. It's not rational at all. And so for African people, we have been brutalized and we live in fear of offending this being that's perpetrating this violence and all this primitive behavior, that we are not able to tell the rational story. Now, not everybody's like that. There's so many brothers and sisters that have come up and told the story. But every time they do that, there's always a controversy. And there's a reason why there's a controversy, because they know that a rational story is being told and an irrational story is being completely demolished. And that's why there's a controversy. Because if there wasn't any irrational story, there's no need for anybody to be insecure about it. All right. So you can see that it starts there, right there. Like whether it's like in Africa, like in the Congo, you name it. You pick a country in Africa where somebody came in and conquer, and then all of a sudden, like I say, you're going to start to see that uh, the men are maybe either castrated or they are humiliated to a point whereby they cannot look respectful in the eyes of their women, of their children, and that gives the oppressor the the reason and the justification. So look, okay, then I'm going to sleep with these women. Now, don't forget that these are the same group of people. The men, the indigenous men, and the indigenous women come from the same group. So it's not just like the men are inferior, the women are superior. No, when they first come, everybody's inferior. But then when it comes to their sexual needs, oppressor sexual needs, all of a sudden, the superior being or the superior human being, whatever he's trying to call himself, all of a sudden, he's sleeping with a subhuman. And so the rational story is that you have to think that way, that, look, if he was superior, then why would he sleep with a subhuman or an inferior being? If you go to the Caribbean, Latin America, in North America, during slavery, the same story over and over and over again. It happens again because it's a trick. It's a trick. And that trick can only be maintained or sustained through violence. That's how it works. Because a rational story does not need violence. If, for instance, somebody comes in to a new land and they have skills, show up on somebody's shores, and you show up and say, look, oh, you know what? I just realized that you all have like rare precious metals. And I have this skill that I do. I do this thing with this thing. You think maybe you can let me use some of those resources and work with it? And they start working together. And there's no like real killing of anybody, no oppression of anybody. That's a rational story. It's a very rational story because somebody came in, offered, that look, no, I know what you see, what you have over there, that can be turned into this, into this, into this, into that. When you come in and work with the people, but when you come and kill the people and then you rape them, but at the same time, you keep on saying that they're inferior, it's not a rational story. It's not a rational story. Any time of the day, whether it's like in the morning, afternoon, evening, or any minute, any second, it's not a rational story. So the idea is to teach our people to be able, when they're debating or they're discussing their history, you got to stick to the rational story. You got to stick to the rational story, not the emotional story, not the irrational story. You stick with the most important part of this story, because in the end, the oppression hasn't even started. Oppression hasn't even started. Because if oppression had ended, then there would be no need for people to be acquiring all these weapons they're acquiring every day, because they know that there's going to be a day sooner or later they're going to need to do the same thing over and over again. And so if you don't train your people, if you don't kind of make sure that your people, they're aware, their eyes are open, so that they can decipher like a stupid story from a very intelligent story, where somebody look, oh yeah, I come over here, I come from this land, that land, and I see I'm over here. Oh, you know what? Oh, I see that you have a beautiful daughter. Can I marry her with permission? And also, the boys from that area can also ask him, oh, I saw you brought a beautiful daughter. Can I marry her? And if the conversations go two ways and everybody's like working together, that's a rational story. But when somebody thinks that he can marry your daughter or he can sleep with your daughter, but then your son cannot sleep with his daughter, it's not a rational story. It's not a rational story. You should not listen to that story. It's what you call the stupid version of life. It's a stupid version of life it can only be maintained or perpetrated through violence, because it's not a rational story. A rational story does not need violence behind it. It can stand on its own, because it's a rational story. You know, you can come in and knock on somebody's door. Excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am. I can see that your car is dirty. Can I wash your car? Right? And somebody might say, oh, okay, you know what? I don't need to wash, or maybe you can wash it. I'll give you so much money. That's a rational story. But when somebody comes in and see your car because you're not in the car and they think that it's theirs and they keep on saying that it's mine, that's not a rational story, no matter how you want to embellish it. No matter how you wanna push it and get angry, you can get angry all you want to. It doesn't change the fact that it's a stupid story. It's even beyond stupid. Sometimes it borders in that area where it becomes like very, very cruel, like evil in some ways. So it's up to us as African people to make sure that all our children are always ready to listen to a rational story, a very rational story, a very rational story, very rational story. Because if I'm not allowed to use your amenities, your bathroom, then you're not allowed to use mine. That's a rational story. So that means we have divided. Okay, you can come there, can come there. That is, and those things happen all the time. Whoever says that, your friend is not allowed in our house. So that means that friend can also say that, you know what, okay, I'm not allowed in your house, then you're not allowed in my house. If that agreement has been made, then it's a rational story. But if you think that they're not allowed in your house, but then you can go to the house and go and burst in that house and do whatever you want to do because you're angry, it's not a rational story. It's not a rational story. And so meaning that our people, our children are the ones, the future. I'm not talking about the older generation or my generation, because this generation is contaminated. It has some fear that has been instilled to a certain level that even people to talk about certain things or to confront oppression on this level, they're scared because they're scared. It's like it has been passed on from one generation to the next. But this generation, we can't let it inherit that because it is a stupid version of life that they should never tolerate it at any time, any day, any time of the day, of the week, of the month, of the year. They should never tolerate it. So it's always teaching our kids to embrace the rational story, the rational story, the rational story that if you claim that you love freedom, then why did you come to my country or to my land and then oppress me and have me under in bondage? Or why did you bring tyranny if let's say you love so much freedom? So that means that's a very irrational story. You love freedom, but you want other people to be in bondage. You want to have your own people in bondage. You want to keep other people in bondage. It's not a rational story. You should not never listen to that kind of a story. It doesn't make sense. Dismiss it out of hand. There's no negotiations. There's no discussing it. It's an irrational story. It shouldn't be listened to. See you next time on this Ngoma Zethu podcast when we present our episode 3. Thank you.